In the early 19th century, Russia found itself in a time of great turmoil. World War I proved devastating for the nation, and its effects added to the great civil unrest and only worsened the already terrible food shortages. These problems slowly led to a revolutionary era that finally culminated in 1917. Specifically, Germany experienced a revolution in February of that year, a failed coup in July, and finally another revolution in October of 1917. Unfortunately, the popular support for these revolutions is not explicitly clear, and the possibility remains that these revolutions were the result of propaganda and not based on popular support. However, examination of the data available from both primary and secondary sources show that popular support for the revolutions varied during the course of the year. Precisely, certain portions of the Russian Revolution were based on popular support. A majority of the nation did not support these changes, but a significant portion of the citizens living in major cities did support the February Revolution, and to a lesser degree, the October Revolution. Leading up to 1917, Russia suffered many problems. First and foremost, Russia's food shortage caused many issues, and a vast number of Russians suffered greatly. While Russia is capable of producing more than enough food for all of its citizens, strain placed on the market by World War I caused food prices to soar. Russia's cities held many workers who lived in poverty. The infrastructure of large cities such as Petrograd left the working class living in overcrowded areas that suffered from poor sanitation. The workers were further angered by their working conditions and lack of a voice on the matter. The Tsar also did nothing to help calm the situation. His government was full of corruption, and he himself often made critical errors when attempting to fix the nation's difficulties. Further, his dissolving of the Duma, or parliament, only angered his citizens more, for they lost their voice in the government. Lastly, World War I offered the final and most critical blow to Russia's stability. The army proved itself to be ineffective and weak as it suffered great defeats with incredible losses of life. In relation to the food shortages, the war crippled Russia's economy and left many workers without food. The result of these factors was a nation that was unhappy and advocating for change. In February of 1917, the revolution finally began with riots in Petrograd over food shortages. A massive strike was set up by revolutionary organizations, and 200,000 of the city's workers went on strike. The revolution continued with huge riots as lower-class citizens began demanding for a provisional government to offer reforms to fix the nation's problems. As the strikes and riots worsened, Russian soldiers were ordered to fire upon demonstrators. John Reese explains the orders and their results.
The Tsar told the commander of the Petrograd military district, "I command you tomorrow to stop the disorders in the capital, which are unacceptable in the difficult time of war with Germany and Austria." Some soldiers obeyed the order to suppress the demonstrations, but many mutinied and joined the revolution.
Soon after, the workers took the Petrograd arsenal, which led to thousands of them being armed in their fight. Essentially, this revolution was unplanned and occurred without a core of influential revolutionaries advocating for a government overthrow. While there were hundreds and thousands of rioters, the majority of the nation did not support the changes and did not wish for a new government. After the demonstrations began, socialist revolutionaries, Menshevik and Bolshevik revolutionaries began calling for the overthrow of the Tsar. However, this was not the original wish of the rioters, and the rebellions were centralized only in Petrograd. As Adrik Yeshov, who participated in the strikes, explains, he never thought the riots would lead to the abdication of the Tsar, but was pleased when they did.
When the strikes first began, all I wanted was an end to the war and the food shortage. I didn't think we needed to do away with the Tsar for that to happen. However, as we kept rioting and the situation worsened, I began to support a major change. I was never involved in any violence, but I was happy to know we would have a new government.
Regardless of their original intentions, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated on March 2nd of 1917, and this led to the creation of the Petrograd Soviet of Workers' and Soldiers' Deputies. The government was now somewhat based on democratic ideals. From February until July, the Soviet was constantly at odds with the provisional government as each party fought for control of the government. Army morale declined quickly as the military had no strong central force commanding it. Further, many Soviets were organized in major cities all across Russia. Overall, the people wanted to withdraw from World War I, and they were becoming more involved, for the Soviets were well connected with the people. In April of 1917, Vladimir Lenin returned to Russia. He took a major role in the Bolshevik Party and worked to gain more power for them to prevent a coup from the peasants. In late spring of 1917, the leaders of the provisional government still refused to end the war and called for more fighting. On July 3rd, what has become known as the July Days began as the Bolsheviks revolted in Petrograd. Lenin and other Bolshevik leaders tried to stop the uprising once it began, and it quickly failed. Gauging popular support for this part of the revolution is difficult, for the Bolshevik core of influential men worked to end the revolt and advocated for peaceful measures before it began. Further, there were tens of thousands of supporters in the resurrection despite the fact that it failed. Leon Trotsky explains the popular support for this uprising.
During the session in the Tarred Palace on July 3rd, I learned of the demonstration of the machine gun regiment and its appeal to other troops and to factory workers. The news came as a surprise to me. The demonstration had been spontaneous, at the initiative of the masses.
As is evident by Trotsky's statement, the workers and soldiers in Petrograd were certainly acting on their own volition. However, the revolt failed, for a majority of troops fought for the provisional government and did not offer their support to the workers and Bolsheviks. In essence, the revolution was popular. The workers, at the most, only acted on their ideas that were possibly influenced by Lenin's leadership, but they were not called by him to act. However, the revolution was not even supported by a majority in Petrograd, and was not at all supported by a majority across the entire nation. After the incident in July, the Bolsheviks, Mensheviks, and socialist revolutionaries joined forces against the possibility of a coup from the military and provisional government. At this time, the nation was moving further towards a democratic republic. However, on October 10th, 1917, Lenin returned to Russia and began arguing for a second revolution. On October 24th, the uprising began, and the Bolsheviks quickly took control of Petrograd, which effectively ended the rule of the provisional government. The revolutionaries attacked the Winter Palace and removed the final members of the provisional government. Unlike the July Days, this revolt was not spontaneous, but rather was the result of the influence of a few powerful leaders. Lenin and others knew they did not need huge numbers to succeed. Truthfully, by October, the Bolsheviks did have more support than they did in April, but they still lacked a majority by far. Many of their allies actually did not support the Bolsheviks at all. They simply had a common enemy in the provisional government. A significant number of leaders of the Mensheviks and the socialist revolutionaries protested against the Bolshevik coup. However, much of the nation simply did not care. They lived their daily lives as if the nation was not in turmoil. Despite this fact, this revolution did spread unlike the others, and the Bolsheviks soon took the city of Moscow as well. In essence, the Russian Revolution did have some popular support through both successful uprisings. The February Revolution had the most support, for a large number of Russians were unhappy with the war and the economy and wanted a change. The July Days incident shows popular support, for the Bolshevik leaders were not at the heart of the revolt, but the party as a whole lacked overall support. By October of 1917, the Bolsheviks had more support. The revolution was controlled by a few powerful leaders. In sum, the Russians wanted a change, but disagreed on the end result. Their want for change was supported by popular support, but the final takeover by Lenin and the Bolsheviks was a product of manipulation, propaganda, and force from a dedicated minority.
Stand up, all victims of oppression, for the time